I'm recording. Okay, welcome everyone to the Israel Daily News Roundtable discussion. I'm so excited to have our second installment of the Israel Daily News Roundtable. This is a place for listeners that are devoted to Israeli news, devoted to understanding what's going on here. And I thank you all so much for keeping up with Israeli politics and Israeli affairs. It's actually incredible. And in our last installment of the round table, we had a question from Jim about how do bills become laws in Israel. And I said, you know what? I'm going to think about who is the perfect person to answer this question. And I remembered Yaniv Roznai, who came to the Tel Aviv Institute, which was a program that I was invited to participate in. And this program was for influencers and impactors and people who are online and talking about Israel and talking about the Jewish world. So I was very excited to be invited to that. But I think the most exciting part was actually meeting Yaniv Roznai, who was able to take the enormity of what's going on in the Supreme Court judicial reforms right now and say it in a way that everybody could understand what was going on. And I really am happy for Professor Roznai to be joining us today. And before I introduce him, just to let you know how special this is, I was invited to the Norwegian embassy for a fancy party that the former prime minister, Ehud Olmert, was at, and it was very fancy. And I was excited to be there. And I was invited because the right-hand advisor of the ambassador from Norway to Israel listens to our show every day and has been listening to our show for years. And he invites me to cover embassy related things. And so I've become in the know of what's going on. And so he approached me at the party and he said, I heard that you're having Yaniv Roznai join you for your Israel Daily News Roundtable. That's super impressive. He's a superstar in Israel. And I said, that's amazing. So people are taking notes that you're with us, Yaniv. So thank you for that. We appreciate it. And thank you for bringing your stardom. Professor Roznai is an associate professor and vice dean at the Harry Radzner Law School and a co-director at the Rubenstein Center for Constitutional Challenges, which I believe we're going through some constitutional challenges right now at Reichman University. He holds a PhD and an LLM from the London School of Economics and graduated magna cum laude and studied law and government at IDC. Thank you so much for joining us, Professor Roznai. And I'd love to open the floor to you to tell us what you're working on right now and why this work is important to you.
Thank you so much, Shanna, for being here, for inviting me to be here. And after this introduction, I can only disappoint the audience, so I hope I will not do so. So let me try to be very brief. You've all heard about the judicial overhaul, I assume, and you've all seen the, let's say, counter protestations who have been so far extremely impressive, but also quite effective in the sense that nothing has been legislated so far since January due to the pressure, the international and national pressure. However, this might change next week, because what we've had thus far is some kind of negotiations between the coalition and the opposition that began in end of March and lasted for about 3 months. And these have been suspended in the last few weeks. And the coalition decided that it would continue unilaterally with parts of the reform. Now, what is interesting, it started as a one big, what we call Hungarian blitz, a huge package of reforms, to my mind, extreme reforms in every aspect. But now in this round, the government, in a way, has learned the lesson. And now they're saying, well, we will not pass everything, the whole package at once, but we will do it incrementally, piece by piece, what we call here in the protestation language, the Polish salami. We'll do it salami system. But what is interesting, when this occurred in Poland or in other countries, the whole idea was to hide the big plan, to hide the big picture. So you do it step by step. But here, already in advance, the ministers and members of parliament from the coalition, they all say, yes, yes, we will do the whole package, but in small steps, step by step. So they're not really hiding the big plan. They're saying, well, now we'll deal with what is termed the reasonableness doctrine, and I'll explain what it is in a second. And later on, we'll move to the ways by which judges are selected, and then we'll move to the attorney general, etc. Okay, so let's focus with this first dish that is now on the table, the reasonableness doctrine. And I use the term the first dish because the Minister for Interior Security yesterday said that the reasonableness, abolishing the reasonableness doctrine is just the, let's say, amuse-bouche. He didn't say amuse-bouche. He said it's the salads that would give you the appetite for the rest of the reform. So let's start with this amuse-bouche, the abolishment of the reasonableness doctrine. What exactly are we talking about? Israel is not like the US in many features. Our constitutional system is completely different. The reasonableness doctrine, in a nutshell, is a doctrine in administrative review, according to which all the bureaucracies, all the executive agencies, in a way, the governmental bodies, are all bound to act in a reasonable manner. What does that mean? It means that they have to consider all the relevant considerations and give them a proper weight. Let me just give you an example from our everyday. If tomorrow the municipality of Tel Aviv, where I live in, will decide to put all the garbage cans in the neighborhood near my building, simply because it's very convenient, functionally wise, because I have a big parking space, I can go to the court and say, this is an unreasonable decision because they haven't considered the damage to the environment, the damage to the health, the inconvenience to the neighbors in my building, etc. And they would have to show that they have considered these considerations and have given them certain weight in the decision-making process. That's, in a nutshell, the reasonableness doctrine. So it is different than what we call foreign considerations. Foreign considerations meaning I cannot consider something that is not really related to the issue. If I, for example, want to appoint someone, I cannot appoint my brother simply because he is my brother, okay? And I cannot act in a conflict of interest. So these are other kind of doctrines that exist in administrative review. And let's put also aside issues that deal with fundamental rights, because if I'm a governmental agency and I violate certain fundamental right, that's a different issue. Okay, so I'm putting these aside. So now what the government is about to do is to abolish this reasonableness standard when it comes to the government, in other words, to the cabinet and to the ministers. Meaning, any decision, regardless of how extreme it is, how far-fetched or arbitrary it is, if a minister or the cabinet adopts this decision, the court will not be able to review its reasonableness. So this means, on the one hand, extremely strengthening the government, the executive, and weakening the court. Okay, dramatically weakening the ability of the court to intervene and supervise the government. Now, in 1 minute, why is it so dramatic in the Israeli context compared to, let's say, the US? In the Israeli constitutional system, or let me phrase it differently, the Israeli constitutional system is completely different from other countries because anyway, we have a very weak system of checks and balances. So if we compare ourselves to the US has a presidential system with a president that has certain veto powers, right? We have two houses, right, within the legislators. So there are certain checks and balances within the legislative process. It's a federal country, so you have a certain vertical separation of powers between the central government and the states, right? There's, of course, a rigid constitution and a rigid Bill of Rights. And if we look at, let's say, not US, but other European countries, European democracies, they are all subordinated to the European Court of Human Rights and the Council of Europe, right? All those who are members, which are members to the European Convention on Human Rights. And all of them, not all of them, sorry, but 26 of them are subordinated to the EU. So whatever the EU legislates, this goes directly to the domestic law of those European countries. Now, in Israel, we are the only democracy in the world without any of these mechanisms. Nothing. So basically, the only checks on governmental powers are the Attorney General and the court. And that is precisely why in this judicial overhaul plan, these are the two bodies that were targeted in the first place. Okay, now, 2 or 3 points before I'll open it to a discussion and questions. As I've said earlier, this would be abolishing just one doctrine in administrative review. So the government is saying, what do you want? What are you worried about? There are still other doctrines. We, the cabinet, even after this change, we will not be able to violate rights or to act in a conflict of interest, etc. Now, that is true prima facie, but it's a bit misleading. Why? 3 reasons. The first reason is that the other doctrines are very hard to prove. No minister will ever say that he acted in a conflict of interest or that he considered foreign considerations. This is something that is very hard to prove in court. So that is why the reasonableness doctrine usually assists the court, even when there are foreign considerations, but no one says so implicitly or explicitly. It's very easy then for the court to try to act as a block and say, well, but you haven't considered so-and-so considerations that were supposed to be taken into considerations. But let's put that aside. That's very legal speaking. Let's put that aside. The second problem is the following. It is true that there are other standards for review. Proportionality, if there's a violation of rights, conflict of interest, etc. But, who promises us, who assures us that after the reasonableness doctrine will be abolished, the next step won't be abolishing or limiting the other standards? If this is just the amuse-bouche, the first dish, how can we be reassured that the government will not continue with other stuff? Obviously, if this is the thing that is worries the government, then they're limiting it. But then the pressure will move to the other standards. So they might try to limit in the next stage other things, as long as they are not committed, and they commit so in a certain legislative act, not to continue with other stuff. It's very unreassuring. Now, again, you need to understand the difference between Israel and US. In the US, it's almost impossible to amend the constitution. Almost impossible. In Israel, this amendment that they're pushing forward can be amended or enacted with a simple majority, and this goes to Jim's question, in a simple majority in parliament, 2 versus 1, 3 versus 2, in one day, in a single day. Okay, there's no supermajority, no special procedure for amending the basic law, nothing. So it can be done very easily. So if they do it once, and then they get the appetite, and they see that it works well, why not to do it with other standards? Okay, so that's a big problem. And the third problem, I think that the main justification for the government, or why they're trying to push with the abolishment of the reasonableness doctrine, is because they want to get rid of the Attorney General. They want to get rid of her. Just earlier today, or yesterday, a minister within the Ministry of Justice, Dudi Amsalem, spoke on the plenary of the Knesset and said that the Attorney General is, and I quote, the most dangerous person in Israel, and that we must get rid of her. Why? Because, in a way, she is against the government. She is against this judicial overhaul, and they don't want it. So they want to put a yes man in this position that would not block governmental power. That's a big problem. Now, why is it a problem? Because if they will remove her from office, which they will be able to do after they abolish the reasonableness doctrine, and they will appoint their own, let's say, yes man or yes woman that would simply allow the government to go forward with whatever they want, who will be the gatekeeper that will actually supervise all the other standards of review? If they will now remove the legal advisor of the Ministry of Treasure or other ministries, and those gatekeepers will no longer be independent, there will be no one to enforce the other standards. So what if we still have proportionality in case rights are being violated if there is no one to enforce it? And let's not forget that they already announced that the next stage is changing the way judges are selected, because the eventual plan is to capture the court and then to get rid of the Attorney General. So the problem is that we cannot examine each proposal on its own. Even if, let's say, we are now in an academic seminar and I can say, well, there are some problems with the reasonableness doctrine, maybe we should limit it. We are not in an academic seminar. We are in a process of democratic erosion or democratic backsliding by which the elected government is trying to undermine other democratic institutions. And allowing the government to abolish the reasonableness doctrine would basically open the door to the next moves in this process. So I'm extremely worried. On the one hand, it's very hard to explain to people, okay, why limiting the reasonableness doctrine is the end of democracy? No, that's not the question. Abolishing the reasonableness doctrine in itself, in isolation, is not the end of democracy. But democracies nowadays do not die in one big bang, in one law that says this is no longer a democracy. No, this is an incremental process of erosion. And only in the end, right, there are some illiberal elements, or democracy is no longer liberal, etc. So that's an incremental process. So the question is whether abolishing reasonableness doctrine will weaken checks and balances and bring about to governmental aggrandizement and to Caesarian politics, which would allow, appointing close friends and give budgets to certain sectors. Yes. And this in turn will enable the government to push forward with more maneuvers towards weakening democratic institutions. And that's why I'm afraid. So we have about 8 minutes until we reach half of the hour. So I would love to answer some questions if there are. If that's okay, Shanna, if that's according to the plan.
First of all, I'm not kicking you out at half of the hour. That's up to you. So if you needed a few more minutes, well, we're here the whole hour. It's up to you. I know your time is precious. And I would love for each of our 3 guests to have a chance to ask a question. So if that's
maybe Shanna, maybe just a minute, because you wanted me to say about what's going on this very moment. So let me just maybe give you an update. So this bill was passed all the legislative procedures in the committee, in the Constitutional Law Committee, and they will probably bring it early next week, probably Sunday or Monday, to the second and third reading, which is not really, there's no big difference. It's all in once. So they read every provision of the law. It's just one sentence in a second reading, and then they vote for third reading. So they do it in one stage. The opposition have proposed a high number of thousands of objections to the bill. So it will take time. This is what they're doing now in the committee. They're going over these objections, but the government has the majority, so I don't see any big issue here. However, there's huge pressure, mainly from the US, mainly from President Biden, to try to reach to an agreement, some kind of a consensus on a more softened version, a more balanced version. And now I think what we're about to see in the next 2 or 3 days is probably some kind of negotiations, trying to see whether we can bring a more balanced reform on the reasonableness doctrine. Who knows? I don't know. The main problem now is the lack of trust. No one from the opposition trusts the government, because even if they say, okay, let's agree on a certain version, who promises us that this will be the end of claims, that you will put the other features of the reform out of the table for this Knesset? No one reassures us that. Okay, thank you for listening. Shana, you muted.
Thank you. Jim, you sent me a number of questions that you had in mind. Why don't you ask one or two of them?
Okay. Well, I'd say about half of them have been answered. I was unaware that the text of the bill was so short. I wish the U.S. Congress would try to keep things as simple as that. I guess, sir, my question would be, why not the Supreme Court, can they not simply let this law pass and then say it's unreasonable?
Okay, that's a terrific question, Jim. Thanks so much. So the problem, I think, is that this is not an ordinary law. This is a constitutional amendment. This is an amendment to basic law, the judiciary. Now imagine the US Constitution being amended, and you have a new amendment, and then the court has to deal whether this amendment is unconstitutional. How can it do so? What are the standards? Because this is part of the Constitution. And this brings about this paradox of an unconstitutional constitutional amendment. Now, luckily for you, I have written the main academic book on this issue. So please Google it, Roznai, Unconstitutional Amendment, OUP 2017, and you can purchase it and see what I think about it. But just to give you a brief on the Israeli context, it's a big problem because this has never happened in Israel. Now, the court has stated in several cases that the power of the Knesset, even when it amends basic laws or enacts a basic law, it cannot violate the core values of the state as a Jewish and democratic country. Okay, that's a very vague and broad, let's say, standard. But here comes the trick. Is it limiting the reasonableness doctrine really a violation of the core value of the state as a democratic country? I don't think it's an easy claim to make, and mainly because, well, let's say, quite ridiculously speaking, this will never happen. We will never have an amendment to a basic law that says Israel is no longer a democratic country. It would always be in small increments. That's the big problem. So I think, and this is what a colleague of mine, Tamar Brandes, and myself are now trying to argue, the court has in a way to adopt a more broad, aggregated approach to judicial review. It cannot just look on this small piece of legislation that is being challenged. It has to take a broad view of the other things that are now pending within the legislative process. It has to examine the entire process, even when it examines just one piece of legislation. But that's not an easy argument to make. So I'm not really, I mean, so let's summarize. The court has certain tools even to strike down this piece of legislation, but it is certainly not an easy thing to do. And if it will do it, this would be the first time in Israel that such an action is exercised.
Thank you. Michael, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. It has two parts. So first of all, Yaniv, thank you. But do you think this rhetoric of us against them is helpful? Because a lot of people elected this government. So I suppose them are us, basically. So do you think we should say them when we discuss these proposed changes? And the second part of my question is, I'm quite liberal. I support the protest, but the government does need to conduct changes which they believe will serve Israel the best. And to do this, they believe they need to limit the power of the courts. Yeah. So there's a line of reasoning. It makes sense in a way. And they are not against Israel. They are patriots, whatever. So how do we square this?
Briefly, two questions. Let me start with the first one. When I say they, I do not refer to the voters of the government. I merely mean those politicians who put forward this reform and try to advance it. And just to give you two facts from the last few days. First, Amir Ohana, the Speaker of the Knesset, who's really a high level politician within the Likud, he confessed in an interview that the Likud has never seen the reform before the Minister of Justice proposed it in January. So the most dramatic and extreme and major constitutional reform ever brought, those politicians in the Likud, which is the biggest party in the coalition, they heard it like every other individual in the country in a press conference without having any debate on it, any discussion, any deliberation on it. So that's simply mind-blowing. Okay, so there were two people, two academics, one from Kohelet, the second one from another institution, from Sapir. They sat with the Minister of Justice and drafted this reform. The Ministry of Justice was completely uninvolved. This is unthinkable. Now, so when I say they, it's not, it's those small and extreme group of people who brought this reform. And this brings me to the second point, but also, okay, the second data that is important. Look at all the recent surveys since January. A vast majority of Israeli people object this reform. Even this small change, so-called small change in the reasonableness doctrine, they're against it. They say, put it aside, we don't want it. Look what you've done to the country. The economy is collapsing. The military is collapsing. The society is collapsing. We've never been so polarized. There's hate in the street. Let's just pause, put everything aside. The government was elected in December. They have done nothing in the last 7 months. Nothing. Deal with the economics. Deal with security. Deal with the health. Deal with the things that the people care. Put aside this stupid reform. We don't want it. Okay, you think it's necessary? You speak on behalf of the people. On the next elections, put it on the agenda. Okay, this was not debated in the elections. So when I say they, I certainly don't mean the voters. I mean those politicians. Now, it is true that the government, of course, it's an elected government. They have the majority and they can bring about changes. Fine, of course, I agree. But they do not have the mandate to undermine the democratic character of the state. They don't have this mandate. And I don't care if it's 64 Knesset members or 80 Knesset members, for that matter. They don't have the mandate to decide that Israel is no longer a democracy. Now, the problem is, their problem, not mine, their problem is that they already revealed the big plan. So now no one trusts them when they say, you know what, I'll only bring this piece. If this was the case, there was already a deal. Because in the current in the recent deliberations, negotiations with the opposition, we said, you know what? Let's do a small change in the reasons doctrine and some minor change with the Attorney General office. But in return, you close the package for this Knesset. No more changes that would undermine the judiciary, that would change the way judges are selected, etc. They were not willing to commit for that. Why not? That raises suspicion. So if that's the case, there's simply no trust. I mean, you want to change, okay, but why again? Let's say they want to change the reasonist doctrine, and I'm a big critical of the reasonist doctrine, like many other colleagues in the academia. But what's now being proposed, there is no one academic in Israel, not a single academic in Israel that deal with public law that I've heard that support this proposal. Not even one. So they brought one person, one academic that says that he supports it, but he doesn't deal with public law. He's a contract law person. And that's it, one person out of dozens of experts who deal with administrative law. There is no one single person that supports its version. And I'll say even more, the biggest objector to judicial activism in Israel, the world expert in administrative review, Professor Yoav Dotan, who built his career on the reasonist doctrine, but against the reasonist doctrine. This is his career. And he was, for 30 years, the biggest objector to the court. Even he says, and he said so in the Knesset, this is too extreme, your proposal. I've never meant that. You're taking it too far. This is dangerous.
Is that, would you say that that's because it's completely 100% taking away any checks at all with nothing left in place to check the government? Is that why it's too extreme?
Exactly, because they don't make any distinction between what type of decision-making is being taken. So, for example, there's a difference between a decision that is, let's say, general policy, a general policy of the government, and between a decision to appoint a certain person to a certain position, or to make a certain decision about a certain organization or a person, right? But they're saying all decisions of the cabinet, of the government, and of the ministers, regardless of their nature. This is too broad. This is too extreme. The government is appointing dozens of people, high officials, and ministers appoint other hundreds of positions. Now, if there are no checks and balances of this decision, they can simply appoint any person to any position, because unlike other European countries, for example, our standards, minimal standards for appointment, are not explicitly written anywhere. So now the Likud party can appoint all kind of people who are, close people to the party, and just put them in various positions, and they've done so. We've seen. So we need to understand the current government. So the current government, with the reasonist doctrine, managed to appoint a minister as the Minister for Interior Security, who was convicted for aiding a terrorist organization. They appointed someone as the Minister of Interior Affairs, who is supposed to be on the next 2 years, the Minister of Treasury, and he was just convicted for tax fraud. So this decision, the court said, no, this is unreasonable. You can't put someone as head of the Treasury if he was just convicted for tax fraud. But this is the level of madness that we have arrived. So just imagine, this is the most high officials. Imagine what they will do in the lower levels. So we're simply now, almost helpless in the situation. This is what we're dealing with.
Thank you. Jim, I'll come back to you, but I just want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to ask Professor Roznai a question. Marianne, do you have first of all, Professor Roznai, is it okay if we continue? Marianne, please go ahead and ask a question if you have one.
Okay, you can hear me? Okay, I just want to thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. And I wanted to ask a question My initial question was different than the question I'm curious about, because as an American citizen, we've always supported the state of Israel. And, you know, we don't always get all the news over here explaining in detail. We do see the people protesting. But my question is, it's been a lot of years, and now suddenly these changes want to be made. I mean, this is the 75th year of the state of Israel, and now suddenly there's all these changes that want to be made. I find that very interesting. Does it tie in with Netanyahu? Does it tie in with some of the allegations made against him about bribery and these things? Does it tie in with this new conservative piece that has come into the government with this coalition with him? It just seems like it's so sudden, and this is one of the differences that I'm seeing, and I'm just wondering, how is that, you know, piece in this process applicable to what we're seeing in the streets of Israel?
Thank you so much, Marianne, for this very important question. So we need to understand that this is for the first time, this is what we call in Israel, we call it a full right, we call it in the jargon, a full right-wing government, which means that for the first time, we have a government, a coalition, that is totally religious and right-wing and extreme right-wing parties. For the first time from the establishment of the state. Actually, Netanyahu, he's the most probably left-wing person in his coalition right now. He's the most moderate person within this coalition. Now, until now, we usually had one party that has been the more moderating party. Okay, you had, I don't know, Ehud Barak or Tzipi Livni or Moshe Kahlon. You had someone who blocked things, because in our coalition system, because you have to form a coalition, it's enough that you have one party that is more moderate, and this party can act as the check, okay, or as the block in a way. But now, when you have such a homogeneous coalition, there's no one to block things. Okay, so that's one point. The second point is Netanyahu's trial. Now, I don't want to say explicitly that this reform is connected to his trial. Okay, although you can find some connections. But let me just put it forward this way. Netanyahu, who has been educated in the US, who knows about the importance of liberal democracy and about judicial independence, he has been prime minister since '96, okay? And thus far, he has always blocked any attempt to undermine judicial independence. Always. And suddenly, he's not blocking it. So one may ask himself or herself, why is that the case? How come? Why? What made him change his mind? It could be the trial, could be other things. But what is clear is that he has changed his mind, because he could have easily blocked it. He could have easily appointed someone else as a Minister of Justice, knowing that the current Minister of Justice is a very strong ideologist in his big aim to undermine the court. Now, you know what? Let's maybe say a sentence. Will this be recorded, Shannon? So let's not say this sentence. Okay. Now, later on, when you'll pause the recording, I might say something. The second. So we said that this is the homogeneous coalition, right-wing coalition. The second is the religious Orthodox parties that seek exemption from military service and seek sectorial budgets for their sectors. Now, these two issues are discriminatory, and the person that would block it, or the body that would block it, is the judiciary and the Attorney General. That's why they want to limit it. And the third collaborator in this big program is those right-wing parties that want to advance the settlements, maybe push towards annexation of the territories. the only organ that can now stop taking away private Palestinian property is the judiciary. Okay, and they already done it once, saying that such a law is unconstitutional for taking private property. Okay, so again, we have here some groups all joined together with mutual interests, and that interest is weakening the Attorney General and the judiciary. Now, going back to Michael or to Michael's claim. Of course, this group of political parties, they have the authority and the mandate to make changes and to govern in a way according to their own agenda, without a doubt, even if some people do not agree with this agenda. But I think there's still a certain line between that and allowing them to make fundamental changes in our constitutional structure that might undermine the values of the state. And they've crossed that line, unfortunately.
Professor Roznai, what are you doing actively right now to prevent these changes?
Well, I think we're acting on all academics, not just me, but many academics, we act on different levels. One level is with the protestations and explanations and trying to explain to the greater public what's going on, what are the risks or not risks with certain drafts and proposals. For example, yesterday, there was a new proposal in the newspaper, a softening of a soft version of the bill, according to which the reasonableness doctrine will only be abolished when it comes to the government, to the cabinet, but not with the ministers. That's a good direction, but it's also a manipulation, because every decision of a minister can go directly to the cabinet very easily. They simply need to put this decision in the envelope that goes on Sunday to the cabinet's meeting and then to vote for it. That's it. There's no, you think when you say to the people, no, but this is a decision of the plenary of the cabinet. Wow, it sounds like as if now the cabinet ministers, they see it and they deliberate. No, you put it in an envelope that what's the decision, and then the secretary of the cabinet reads, okay, now we want to vote on this and so decision. They vote, and that's it. So, our role as academics is try to explain things to the public. So on one level, we do that vis-a-vis the protestations, the broader public, on the media. But on the other level is to try to work with the coalition and with the opposition and try to see whether we can bring about a more moderate and reasonable, forgive me for using this word, a reasonable change for the reasonableness doctrine. If it will succeed, time will tell.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate this. I think that you gave such a deep, we can really feel your passion. Any comments from you, Professor Roznai, or any comments if anyone wants to say anything here to our gracious guest for today?
Yes, Jim.
Well, first I want to echo Marianne and say how grateful I am that you came on. Since I'm the person who kind of asked the first question, I want to thank you because you have answered every question I had. I agree with Shanna. I can see your passion. Instead of just being a dry academic, you care. And that comes across so clearly with your passion that it makes me understand the protesters so much more. It's not just, oh, they're protesting the government. No, this is an issue people care about. And I have looked up your book, so I will be getting that very shortly. I look forward to it. But like I said, I just really want to thank you because it's a question that I've had since this whole process started about how things work. The internet's a dangerous thing. I've gone on and looked, and you find contrary things, authoritative articles. So you kind of put all that aside for me. So I just want to thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jim. And you know, it's quite amazing. You see those people. If you had told me in November 22 that we would have 200,000 people in the street protesting about the reasonableness doctrine in administrative review, I would probably have to punch myself, you know, in the face. This is probably unbelievable. Or about the way judges are selected to the Supreme Court. But I think Israel has gone in the last few months what Bruce Ackerman, a law professor from Yale, calls a constitutional moment. And this is a time in the life of the nation where people, where masses, there's when there's mass mobilization, and the people talk about high politics, not everyday politics. You know, we have the Friday Parliament in Israel. You go, you hear people talk about everyday politics. No, this is about high politics, about judicial independence, about democracy, about rights, about judicial independence, about the rule of law, concepts that we have all been taken for granted the last 30 or 40 years because they were never under threat or severe threat. And for the first time, people now, you know, start to cherish what they have. And this is a very, if you think about it, this is a very conservative protest. We don't even want an improvement of the situation. We don't want a constitution. We don't want a Bill of Rights. We don't want a separation between state and church. We don't want non-discrimination and that the religious Orthodox will go to the military. No, just don't touch anything. Don't undermine our rights. Don't make things worse. It's a very conservative protest in many ways.
Michael, Marianne, any last comments that you'd like to share?
I'm just really feeling like it's amazing to see all of those people in the streets. And it seems like the protests just keep getting bigger. And it's wonderful to see the citizens of Israel engaged and see their passion and see them stepping forward in this great moment in your history. I mean, this is the 75th year of Israel. And it's such an important thing that we have the state of Israel. And I just hope, against hope, that somehow we can find a way to, with everybody that's involved in this process politically, to work our way through this process so that there is an outcome that is favorable for the citizens of Israel. That's my hope.
Thank you so much, Marianne.
Okay, thank you, Yaniv. We've taken so much of your time today, and we appreciate it. And we are here to support you in the huge work that you're doing to safeguard the state of Israel, which absolutely must continue and continue democratically, because we've got a lot more to go. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Shana, for the invitation. Good luck, everyone. See you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
What did you guys think?
It was pretty amazing.
You great?
Yes. It like I said to him, the passion just blew me away. I was not expecting that. I also wasn't expecting him to be so young.